Welcome to the Worship Keys YouTube channel. My name is Carson Bruce. So glad you're here. We talk all things music theory, gear, industry, and ministry for your worship keys playing. If this episode is beneficial for you or you have any questions as you continue to watch, feel free to comment below, and I'd love to hear any feedback that you have along the way. So let's get into today's episode. Jonathan Gamble is with us today. Guys, y'all are in for a treat. He is a signed songwriter for Capitol. Jonathan, thank you for being here today.
Dude, I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah.
Really glad to be here.
How you doing?
Dude, I'm doing great. I like having that conversation, just like, oh, how you doing? But recently, it's just been like really good. Like this year, I've had this conversation with my wife several times. I think this year is like top tier. We've had so many great things go on this year. Like I just had my first #1 song, and got to go on an awesome like writing trip earlier this year where we got to like go on like this private island that was really cool and bougie, and then we're having our first baby girl this year. So like,
congrats, man.
Thank you. So it's a great time.
Now you've had a little baby dog for a little bit.
Yes, we have, and he's being demoted soon. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Congrats to you and your wife Sierra. Shout out to Sierra. I met Jonathan in undergrad college days, and we were in the worship ministry together. You were on staff at a church too, and I just saw your passion for songwriting. And y'all, this guy is so special with lyrics and melodies, and I'm so excited to just let him share. And you just got your first #1, bro, not too long ago this year, and I believe that's just like the first of many.
Oh,
bro.
thank you,
It's
man.
just gonna keep coming, and it's so fitting. The name of the song is "Counting My Blessings."
Yeah.
So fitting for you, bro.
Thank
I
you,
know
man.
you had a post about that, and I think that's so special that that's your first #1.
Dude.
Is "Counting My Blessings."
For those of us who are writing songs full time, like you're writing a song every single day. So like you're trying to write a hit song, but you're also, trying to, like, there's a ministry element to it. So you're trying to write something that like you want to say to God, that God wants to say to other people. Like you're trying to write something that feels important and like it matters, and not just like some trite thing to say or whatever.
Right.
Some days you'll write something that you're like, oh my gosh, this song is so special to me, and then it never gets cut. Like it just like dies in a Google Drive.
Right.
And then sometimes you'll write one that you're like, well, the artist wanted to write this song that was just like, I didn't really like that much, and it feels kind of corny or whatever, and then it becomes a radio single. So that happens for everybody. Like everybody writes the spectrum of songs because like you just like ride the energy of the day. So there's the whole broad stuff. So many people had told me, oh, your first hit song is going to be some song. You're like, oh, really? That one? Like, I don't like that song that much. And like, that's not really what I do. And then they're like, oh, and then like the next couple of years, everyone's calling your publisher trying to book you for a session because they're like, oh, we need one of those. And you're like, no, I don't even want to write those. Like, that's not even what I do. Or like you're in the room with somebody else who is like really on it that day, and they wrote an awesome song that is not for you. And then so you're like, well, that was really them that drove that session, not me. And so now I'm getting a call to do. So it's like, I heard that from so many people. So for Counting My Blessings to be my first #1 song, like I'm so proud of that song. Like, and it is like deeply important to me. I feel like gratitude has made such a change in my life, just focusing on things that I'm thankful for. And like I have always done that with my wife. Like me and Sierra will just be like, man, I'm just so thankful that we have a house now, and we were in like just trying to remember like where we were in the previous season, and like now we have the things that we were praying for. Absolutely. And like think about that before we pray for the next thing. That's just always been really important to me. So for this song to be the first thing that really like connects in this way in my career is just really special. It's really validating for me. So people like the thing that I do that I like. As opposed to like, oh, I'm really good at making stuff that I don't like, but other people will. Because sometimes you can get stuck in the mentality of, oh man, they're gonna love this, and it's like, even though you don't like it, and so then you kind of get stuck in this thing where like it kind of robs the joy. And when you get stuck in that mentality, it kind of robs the joy of creating, because you're like, oh, I'm making things that I'm not proud of, that I'm assuming I'm putting all the value of the song in whether or not someone else likes it. And you can't guarantee if anybody's going to like it anyway.
Wow.
But you can guarantee that you're going to like it. You can keep working on it until you do. So that has been super special with that song, it being like the first one that has resonated in this way, because from the day we wrote it, it's really resonated with me.
And you've been signed with Capitol for 2.5 years?
Yep, 2.5.
But I want to back up a little bit at the start of this episode, just to kind of talk about your background, because it's easy to talk about where you are now and your success. I think it's incredible, man, like just God's hand on you and your talent. And you've been working at this since you were 14 years old.
Yeah.
Now, Jonathan is a keys player. Everyone who's on this podcast, they play piano. Jonathan is a keys player. He's a producer. But now as a career, you're a professional songwriter. But take us back to the years of when you were a child, you were learning just the piano.
Yeah.
Just the bare bones piano.
Yep.
And then just take us through your whole journey of like how that morphed into songwriting and where you are today, man.
Totally. So my dad plays piano. He can like sight read Chopin. Took piano lessons for years and like can sit down and like be very entertaining to watch play and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But he does not play anything by ear at all. Like I had Keyscape pulled up on my like rig at home, and I was like, oh, he's gonna think Keyscape is so cool because he has like a baby grand at home that he plays on sometimes, and he's never really done like software piano. So I was like, he's gonna think this is so cool that I can like emulate all these different pianos. Let's pull up the Yamaha C7 and like pull up the whatever. And so he's over at my place, and I was like, here, play. And like he got up to the thing and he was like, well, I don't have any music. Like, I don't know what to play. And I was like, I've never thought about that. Because again, he's an amazing piano player.
Right.
And I've just never thought it, because I really can't read music. Like I can tell you what the notes are. And if I like sat down, I could like learn it. If I was like on a desert island with a piece of music, after like a week, okay, now I know how to play this thing. I've just always played by ear. Mm-hmm. When I was like, I don't know, probably 7 or 8, he started trying to teach me because I was interested. And so he had like the little hands piano books or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I would try and play it, and he would like show me how to read the music, and I would just end up memorizing the music because again, those things are so simple anyway.
Right.
So I would end up just like being like, okay, so that's what it's saying. So, and then I would just like look at my hands and play it. So I just kind of always got in the habit of just playing by ear, and I could just tell when it was like right or wrong, which is not some fantastic ability. It's just like, learning piano. So that was kind of like my early introduction to it. And then I kind of lost interest, as kids, wane in and out of things. And then when I was like 12 or 11 and 12, Guitar Hero came out, and like everybody was playing Guitar Hero. And I was like, this is awesome. And I have OCD, so I'm like super obsessive about things. Yeah. I got so into Guitar Hero, and I'm like ripping it up. I like destroy all my friends at Guitar Hero. And I'm like, oh, I'm so good at Guitar Hero, I bet I'd be really good at guitar. Yeah. So then I got a guitar and learned that was not true. So I got a guitar for my 13th birthday. And then started learning how to play. I like found these videos where this guy would teach you how to play the songs from Guitar Hero on guitar. That's and like cool. Just like the riffs and stuff from like the 80s songs and stuff.
Right.
So I started learning how to do that just as like a fascination with music. And then picked up on it pretty quickly just because I guess had an ear for it from like hearing my dad play all the time and like noodling around on the piano. Right. So picked up on it kind of quickly. And it probably helped that I kind of knew how the songs went from the game too. But so like spent a couple months doing that. And then I got to the point where I was like, oh, I can play like Don't Stop Believin' on piano. And because I was also like this whole time, like since I was like 8, like I would noodle on piano every now and then, but like not like play anything impressive, but I would like find a YouTube video of, oh, here's how you play I Can Only Imagine. And then I would practice it for a weekend and like the thing. So then I got to a point where I'm like, oh, I can play the cool like piano riff for Don't Stop Believin'. And have like a keyboard with like the funky sound or whatever, so it sounds like the e-piano thing. Right. And I was like, oh, I can play that, and I can play it on guitar, like the chords. I was like, oh, I wish I could play them together. And so then for my birthday, I asked for this. I think it was called a Zoom H4n. It had like 2 little inputs and like the like XY microphones on top.
Yes.
And I like got a 1/4 inch, and I would just like plug in and like record it. And at first it was just on the thing. Like it had its own like little interface where you could record like up to 4 tracks or something.
Absolutely, right.
And then, so I would like play in the piano and then play guitar. And I was like, hey, I like recorded the song. And I just thought that was so cool. And it came with a free copy of Cubase, which was a digital audio workstation. Yeah. So then that's kind of how I got into Cubase. Everyone on the podcast is probably like, Cubase? Like what? I still use Cubase to this day, and everyone rags on it.
I remember you talking about that, Jason.
Everybody rags on Cubase. And it's fine. It's fine.
But when you hear what you create, it's like, hey, it's just another tool.
I'm like, they all do the same thing. Would I probably be better off? Because like I work primarily as what's called a top liner. We can get into that later. But I'm not functioning primarily as a producer in the room. So like if I was, then like should I learn Logic or Ableton or something? Probably, but I don't. So like Cubase is great for demos,
There you go.
So doing that. So I got Cubase. It didn't have any of the plugins. It was the free version. So I could just like have the tracks. So then I like installed it on our like home computer or whatever. And I was like, oh, I can like have more things. Then I would like, I'd just like lay down new things. Then I was like, oh, well, if I just like mute the piano, then the guitar is just chords. Like what if I made up my own like piano thing to go with it? And then that kind of, I'm like, oh, that's cool. And you just kind of get hit with like the dopamine rush of like, oh my gosh, I made something that's kind of cool. That was just kind of like the introduction of like, the little like encouraging things along the way of like, oh, that was really fun. Come back the next day and be like, oh, I don't like that as much as I liked it yesterday. But now I have another idea. Or like doing it and being like, oh, are there any drums that I could do? Or like, what if I just like clap on the thing, like record it with the little microphone? So just getting in, learning creativity kind of for the first time. I was never good at like drawing or painting or like anything like that kind of art. I'm just not good at like visual art stuff. It was maybe the first time that I was like, oh, I can like, in a very, very simple way, kind of express my creativity in some way. A lot of creatives, I have this conversation all the time, like a lot of us still don't really feel that creative. And I still don't really feel that creative because I kind of math a lot of things out. But that was that first taste of like, oh, like this is creating. I feel like songwriting is about as close as I have found where you can get to the feeling of genuine creation because you walk into a room and something doesn't exist and you walk out and it does.
Wow. Yeah.
Even with like painting and stuff, like you're taking paint that it already exists and you're arranging it in a beautiful way. And like, that is a talent that I do not have and I have so much respect for.
Right,
fascinated by
same.
it.
Yes.
And like cinema, I guess cinema would be similar because it's like film and stuff. Like there's something that wasn't there and another. But anyway, I'm just like really fascinated with that process.
Yes.
So that I just kind of got hooked on it. And then eventually, and I did not sing at this time at all.
Really?
Not at all. So I had never sung anything until I was like 14.
Wow.
Then I get to the point where I'm like, I can play guitar, I can like play piano and stuff. And then I'm having these ideas like writing melodies on instruments, but not like singing. And I don't remember what it was. I was going through some like emotional moment as like a 13, 14-year-old or whatever. And I was just like, I'm going to write a song. And I vented with a guitar in my hand, kind of thing. So I just remember I remember writing it and then just feeling, it was just so cathartic. Because I think I was also in a place in my life where I didn't feel like I had a lot of outlet. In the South, it's not like you're like talking to your friends about your feelings all the time. It's as we probably all should have, but like it was just not that kind of environment. So I was like, oh, this is a place where I can actually like, it feels acceptable for me to like present my emotions in this way. And I don't even have to show anybody. I can just like do it and it feels great and I feel good about it and all that stuff. But then like I did enough and I was like, these kind of rip. They're kind of cool. And they sucked. They were awful. But like at the time I was like, am I amazing? I just like fall in love with the process of songwriting at that point. And I had still never really sung for anybody. But so I started writing faith songs because at that point, like I'd started going to a youth group in my area. We went on Sundays and it was like a 45-minute drive out to where we went to church. It was like the Church Alive is worth a drive vibe,
Yeah, you're right.
So, so since it was so far, we didn't go on like Wednesday nights and like we weren't like super plugged in. So then a friend of mine from school invited me to a youth group that was like 5 minutes from my house. And I was like, youth group? You mean they're like people our age that like get together and like talk about faith and like have music? I was like, what? I'd never heard of it. So then I start going there and I'm like, this is awesome. And then I like sign up for the worship team. So I'm like, oh yeah, I can play keys and guitar. And then like I wound up showing up early one week and just noodling on the drums. And they're like, hey, you should play drums this week. And then I became the drummer for like 6 months.
Wow.
So it was just like that kind of stuff. So again, just like this fascination with music, and then started writing like every day when I got home from school. I would go upstairs like where I was like alone and just write for hours. I just like became super obsessed with it. Again, obsessive personality. So I just got super into it.
That's awesome.
Not even thinking about like trying to write great songs, but just being like, I don't know. I wasn't thinking about it much then, to be honest. I was just like writing. And I didn't know chords. I didn't know the number system yet. I didn't really know any of that. I would just be like, this guitar part's cool. I don't understand any of it, but I would just noodle until I found something that felt cool. And then I would like start mumbling things over it. I was super fortunate. At the time, I was like, oh, this is really cool. But then like now looking back, I'm like, that was such a God thing. I didn't realize like how valuable, almost literal education that I got from the worship leaders at my church was in songwriting. Like I know people who go to Belmont, these amazing music schools, who don't leave with the level of understanding that the worship leaders at my church made sure that I got.
Wow.
It's just so incredibly fortunate, and I love them so much. Lance and Tara DeMerchant, they're amazing. They had spent time in Nashville. Lance was a songwriter and everything, and then Tara wrote songs with him. So they both had a really deep, rich understanding of songwriting.
That's awesome.
I had written some song, and I had, again, gotten kind of plugged in the youth worship team and not really done anything on Sunday morning yet, but Lance and Tara would come over, and they would lead worship in the youth because there was like a rule where whoever was leading worship for the youth had to be a student. So Lance and Tara were coming over filling in because the guy who had been leading it just graduated and they had not found a replacement yet. So they were like, okay, so we'll lead it for a little bit, and we'll have like the students play, but we'll lead and then like have them play all the instruments and whatever. And so I got to know them through that. And eventually I like stayed after one time. I was like, hey, can I show you a song I wrote? And they're like, that's awesome. Yes. Yeah. They're always so encouraging. And I showed them the song. I played the song that I had written about Job for whatever reason. I probably just read some passages. I was like, that would be a cool song. And it was not very good. But then, so played the song. And I remember their reaction. They were like, "That's so cool. Can you sing How He Loves?" And I was like, "What? Why would you? I just bared my heart to you in song. Why would you ask me to play some other song now?"
Right.
But then I was like, "Yeah, I guess." And I played How He Loves. And they're like, "What would you think about like being the youth worship guy?" And I was like, "What? I don't want to like sing in front of people." I was kind of terrified to show you guys. and then eventually they came back and we talked about the song and like went super in depth with that. But initially they were like, "Oh my gosh, maybe you're the person we've been looking for to be able to lead the students," who is a student. And I was in like 8th grade at the time. So I would be able to do it for a long time and all this stuff. So it was just kind of this perfect alignment of like, okay, I was stepping into something that I didn't know they were looking for really, or like praying for. Yes. But then also they wound up being such an answer to prayers I didn't know I should have been praying, you know? Wow. So like they made an internship for me at the church when I was in like 9th grade. I'd been leading the whole time, which was a whole thing. Like I was like playing basketball for my school and like that was all I ever wanted to do. So I made the varsity team and then the practices were at the same times. And so I was like, oh, I kind of have to choose. And so I wound up choosing the worship route because I felt like I just had this conviction. Even that, it sounds like not a big thing, but anyone who's ever played high school sports, like it's a big thing to walk away from it. So anyway, so I think that compounded my investment too in the worship team, the worship ministry, because I gave up something that was so important to me to choose this. So anyway, so my 9th grade year, they create an internship at the church for me. And so my school just adopted this like block schedule thing where basically, if you had a thing to go to, like a job or internship or whatever, then you could leave at 1 instead of at 3 every day. So I would leave at 1 every day and go to the church, and they would have a like top 40 worship song and a top 40 pop song printed out like lyrically. We would mark the stressed and unstressed syllables, count the syllables in each line and see if they match, talk about melodic deviation, motif structure, chorus structure, verse structure, like what do they do on a bridge? Do they change chords when they go to the bridge, or do they just continue doing like what's a post-chorus, what's a pre-chorus? Why do some songs have a pre-chorus and some don't? Like just talking through all of that stuff, and did that for like all of high school. Wow. So like we would, break down everything from Hillsong to Ariana Grande, you know? So it was just like, because honestly, they're not that different. Like structure is structure. And so you kind of start to figure out like, okay, great songs just have this structure to them, and then they paint with different colors inside those lines to determine the genre. You know, if there's an up-tempo song, they tend to do this kind of structure, because if you do this other structure, it feels sleepy, and you don't want that for an up-tempo. But if you do the up-tempo structure for a ballad, then it feels corny. So you don't want to do. So it's like all those things, like learning and like emphasis syllables. That's a big thing that I hear in like beginning songwriting that I learned. It was like, oh, you can't have the emphasis on the wrong syllable. Like the highest note of your melody or the most elongated note of the melody is what's getting the emphasis. So if you have it on like the wrong, on a syllable that shouldn't be emphasized, then it messes up the flow. It makes it feel less natural. Yeah. And there are exceptions to the rule. Like we always joked about Revelation song. The first line of the song is a prosody error. So it's worthy is the Lamb who was slain. It's like, well, why are we emphasizing the so much? Right. But it works. So it's like there are no like rules so much to speak as like guidelines, and then like when you break them, just break them on purpose.
There you go.
But anyway, so I got to learn all of that. So again, that was
for 4 years.
For 4 years, dude. Like they like just really took me under their wing and like showed me more than anything, like more than even just like the literal things that I learned. It's like I learned how to learn about songs. You know what I'm saying? That's like good. Because I wound up taking that mentality with me, even though I didn't have them with me 2 hours a day anymore once I graduated and went on to serve at churches without them.
Right.
I had that mentality of like, okay, if I want to learn how to do a certain thing, I can just go find a bunch of songs that do that thing really well and find what they're all doing in common. Amazing. And then not rip it off, but like if all basketballs are orange, you know, maybe I make an orange basketball instead of trying to make a blue one and sell it to Wilson, you know?
There you
so
go.
Like, it's just like, okay, maybe I like learn the rules and then like get creative within those bounds as opposed to trying to play with the box itself, you know?
That's good, man. So you're studying the songs.
For sure.
You studied them for 4 years, man, before you even entered your college years. and I'm
Yep.
sure you continued to study songs then.
Yep.
I remember you made an Instagram account that highlighted amazing songs. Tell us about this Instagram account, because I
Okay.
followed it. I was a follower.
That's so funny. I made that account not knowing Instagram would then go to all of my friends and be like, hey, somebody you know made this account that's really dorky and you don't care about at all, but you should follow it to support him. And then so I get all these comments from people who do not care about songs at all. Just being like, this is so cool. I'm like, this isn't for you. Go away. No, so I just didn't know that it was going to like share it with the people that I knew. The goal was to try and put it in front of people who care about songs and songwriting, whatever.
Right,
and so it's like the people in the kids in the youth group that I'm a youth pastor for, like this is not their content, you know,
Right,
they don't
right.
care. I literally would just like find a pop song that was popular and just like talk about one of the things that I found fascinating about the structure that they did, like the internal rhyme structure. Like there's so much internal rhyme in good pop songs and in country songs now. Like it's really, really common.
And you
like
write in all genres, not just
I
Christian.
write in all genres, primarily in CCM, worship, and country. But just because that's what happens in Nashville, you know, because there is pop that happens in Nashville, but it's not the majority of it. That's mostly in LA. But yeah, like it's on internal rhyme. Like there's so much in the new Morgan Wallen Post Malone song, like Song of the Summer, you know, it's like there's a lot of internal rhyme going on in that chorus. Like that's a case study. First song everybody should go study is the chorus structure on that song, because it's a bookend structure, but they add a syllable to the end of the bookend to end the chorus. There's just a lot of double syllable rhyme happening, I think, in the zeitgeist of music right now. I would find songs like that on this account and just be like, oh, it's really cool that they're actually like using the vernacular around clocks and time. And so the song is called About Time, and then the verse talks about like the hands on a clock, and then the chorus talks about a watch, and so it's like just kind of pulling together things like, hey, you may have not noticed this about your favorite song. And I did that for like probably 2 or 3 months, but then I was like, too many people that I know have followed this, so I'm gonna like ditch it.
Let it go.
But yeah, I've always been fascinated by that stuff. A lot of people just have really good instincts, which has never been my thing. Like I have to overly like logic it and math it and be very intentional. Whereas I thought that's how everybody was writing songs. Like I thought that was the norm. There's so much of it just happening in these great songs. And then you start like writing with people who are brilliant. And it's like, they don't even know that they're doing these brilliant things. They just have such good instincts that they happen.
Yeah.
So like, I've always been very jealous of that, because like I work with so many incredibly talented people that just ooze talent, and they just have like, every idea they have, they're not mathing it out. It just comes out and it just feels cool and good and emotional, and like it doesn't have any of those prosody errors, because they wouldn't know to say like, oh, the emphasis is wrong, but they would just be like, that doesn't feel right. So I just kind of like learned coming in. I was like, okay, so I don't have that ability, but I do have a unique skill set in that I learned why things feel like they do. Because for a while, some people like discouraged me from doing that. They're like, that's gonna make all your songs stale and uninteresting. And now that's the thing that's kind of like defining my career. There's no right way to do anything. I think the biggest thing that I've learned in the past couple of years in regards to songwriting, but I think applies to all creativity and business, is just like, you can never be a better someone else than them. I think Jason Ingram is brilliant. He's a brilliant songwriter. If I try and do what Jason Ingram does better than Jason Ingram, he's always going to out Jason Ingram me.
Right.
You know, like he's just, because he's got that on lock. He is him. I have to figure out what Jonathan Gamble does really well. And I have to learn how to be the best at that instead of just trying to emulate someone else. So it's like learning from other people and like being open, where like, oh, that's a strength of yours. What can I take from that? But not trying to build my whole career around someone else's identity as a songwriter.
So tell us, so present day, you're writing with tons of great artists, and you've been working hard, man. You moved out to Nashville, you made some connections. What kind of made that transition from independent writer, but you're now signed to Capitol? What really was defining in that? Like, what made that success for you, man?
Great question. So I'll preface all this with like, it's not a rinse and repeat kind of story. And what I've learned too is like, there isn't one. Like,
absolutely.
I meet so many people in my job and get to hear like, oh, how did you get into this? And like, I've had that conversation literally maybe 1,000 times. So, and I don't know that I've heard the same story twice. You know, it's like, it's always through some random connection with some random person, and then it like almost fell through, but then like they're like, oh yeah, meet this person, and then they hit it. Like, it's just like so random. So
organic.
my super random crazy story that's literally unbelievable, but it's true, is So my friend and I, Stephen Floyd, who now also works at a record label in town, which is amazing. Like, what are the odds? We're from the same town. He and I were like making music together in college. He was my roommate in college. And we wound up, like, we had just like sent out tons of like cold DMs to like label people that we like Googled and found, whatever. Nobody hit us back except for one guy, Lance. He's like, hey, let's hop on a phone call. Like, the songwriting in this stuff is really good. And I was like, oh, thank you. Like, I haven't heard anyone like in the industry. He was the first person I ever met in the industry. So I was like, I haven't heard anybody who like outside of Alabama tell me that my songs are really good. So
Right.
So we hop on a phone call and we're like trying to play hardball. We're like, we want a contract with what, because we had Googled stuff and we're like, I never Google stuff. And so, and it was more me. It was not Steven. I was being dumb. But I was like, yeah, I think we'd be more interested in like, is it a 360 deal or like, and he's not offered us a record deal at all. Everybody online will tell you, be like, don't sign a 360 deal. And there are people who have never been offered a record deal, you know? So it's like, and so you just hear all these horror stories. And I kind of just totally embarrassed myself because I was so green. And he was like, oh yeah, I'm not offering you a record deal. And he was like, but I mean, I am like interested. Like, you were doing like a kind of a Christian EDM kind of thing at the time, which I wouldn't recommend. But no, it was like at the height of like when Hillsong Young and Free was really cool. Like Zed was popular and mainstream music. So like, and I was so into it, but I was not a very good EDM producer. Again, I'm not like a producer. I can produce a great demo, but I'm not trying to like do master productions at this point in my career, maybe down the road. But so I was like learning how to be an EDM producer. I'd produced 2 of my own like worship records already that I'd put out.
And I've listened to all those albums, man. How many albums did you?
3.
3. Okay.
3, and then so yeah, one when I was like 15, one when I was 17, and then one that came out when I was like 20.
That's important to note because like even along the journey, you're working and putting stuff out, and even though you can look back now and be like, I could have made this better, but you're proud of those moments, like in this growth.
So yeah, we did this phone call, and he was like, yeah, like if you guys would do 50 shows and give me a call. This is my number, because we were in like this little EDM SoundCloud community, EDM Christian SoundCloud producers, which is, there were like 11 of us, you know, in the world. Like, it was international. Wow. And there were like 11 of us. So, really
defining the niche.
Yeah, literally the most niche thing I've ever been a part of. And so we're like, okay, let's go try and book some Christian EDM shows in rural Alabama, which might be the most daunting task of all time. Man. Yeah. And no one wanted that at all. I don't know if the best salesman I know could book many dates for that kind of thing. Because it's just like, if you want a Christian show, you're wanting like church music, you know, or like country maybe in rural Alabama. And if you're wanting EDM, you're not wanting Christian music in like in like Alabama. So we booked like 2 shows and like they went okay, you know. So we're like, okay, so maybe this isn't our thing. So Lance had told us to read this book called Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business. Okay. And then he was like, y'all need to both read this. And I was like, awesome. And I didn't read it. And but Steven did. He went and got it and he read it. Okay. And he was like, I think I want to be like an artist manager or something. And I was like, dude, I don't think that's a thing you can just go do, but that's awesome. I love that for you. He's like, I'm going to transfer to MTSU and like go to like music business school. And I was like, that's bold, but more power to you. I love you. I believe in you. Go do it. But I have no idea how you're going to make that happen. So he goes to MTSU. So he's in Murfreesboro at that time. And then I'm still like serving at the church, finishing out my marketing degree at college and get married in that time and doing other life things at that time. I'm still kind of writing songs, but really not that often. Like, we were writing together, writing stuff for Engage, like the worship ministry that we were a part of for college. Really loved being a part of that. Like, that kind of kept the songwriting thing going, just because I was like, oh, I have an outlet where if we write a cool song, like we can go lead it and we can see how people respond to it. That's always like, I think, the most refreshing thing, especially for any of us who are worship leaders and serving at churches, is writing something that is really important to you, that you felt like was capturing a moment between you and God, and kind of brings that moment back out of you when you sing it. Yeah. And then seeing other people find themselves in that moment is just a really cool experience. And so just seeing them connect to it genuinely, as opposed to like coming up after me and like, hey, I like that song. But like seeing someone like visibly like connecting with God through something you're a part of is just cool. That kind of kept that fire stoked in me. I had started a social media advertising business at the time. I was like cold calling restaurants and like local mom and pop shops, and it was going really well for a while. And then they changed the algorithm, as they do, and then it like tanked all the things that we'd done. And I was like, that's really stressful. And I was like getting a lot of like weekend calls from like a restaurant. Like I'm like on a date with Sierra, and then would get a call from like the sushi restaurant that was one of our clients. It'd be like, hey, y'all posted a thing that's like the incorrect ingredients on this roll, and now everybody's freaking out in the Facebook comments. I'm like, well, that's the ingredients on your website. And but then it's like, but I can't say that, so it's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Let me get it fixed. And then I'm like on a date, like trying. So I was like, okay, some people are amazing at that and like really good at compartmentalizing. And I was like, that's just not me. Like I'm too much of a people pleaser. Like I need everyone to like me at all times. Like, so having someone be frustrated with me, I was like, okay, this is like making me anxious. I was like, maybe this, even though it's working well, maybe this is not something I want to build back up after this kind of tanks. So then that kind of died out. And then I got this random text from my friend Asher Postman, who's super talented. He has done tutorials and stuff on YouTube for a long time, and he's kind of a public personality in that regard too. He and I had known each other through that tiny EDM Christian SoundCloud producers thing.
Yeah.
And we'd worked together a couple times. He lived in Michigan at the time. And he was like, hey, would you want to write? And we'd written like once on like Google Hangouts before Zoom was cool, And so he was like, hey, you want to write? And I was like, dude, would love to. Like, and so we hop on a Google Hangout session, and he was like, yeah, like I've been like doing some more legit sessions recently. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And also, pause, I forgot to mention, the way he got these more legit sessions was Steven, my friend, who now works at Centricity, a label in town. Yeah. He had gone on LinkedIn. He's at MTSU at this point, trying to figure out how to be in the music business. Right. And he goes on LinkedIn and like searches everybody, like finds all the Christian labels, and like basically looks through their entire staff and finds all the A&Rs. So he had found out, he was like, oh, A&R is like working with artists, like not a manager, but it's like working on the label side, helping them create the projects and like signing talent, and like that's like his gift. So he was like, okay, so that's what I want to do. I want to be an A&R. And he had like found all the A&Rs in town, and he like found their LinkedIn profiles, which is so specific. Wow. And then paid for like 1 month of the like LinkedIn Gold or whatever, where he could send like so many like cold DMs without an actual connection, a link or whatever. Okay, yeah. And so he sent a cold DM to like however many people, and the DM was, hey, I'm an aspiring music industry professional. I've like found this producer that I've worked with a couple of times. I think you'd really like working with him, blah, blah, blah. And it was a link to Asher's profile.
Oh, that's genius.
Yeah. So, and nice. It was, which is so funny because it was like a cold LinkedIn DM with a link to a SoundCloud profile, which are like maybe the two most unreliable platforms. So it's like, is this a phishing scam? Like, but for some reason, so a guy who I actually saw yesterday, who's a good friend of mine, John Sell, who was a part of signing Lauren Daigle when he was at Centricity. At this point in his career, he was at Capitol as an A&R. Mm-hmm. And so he opened that message from Steven, listened to Asher's stuff, and was like, this is great. Called Asher the next day, flew him to town, and had him work with like Danny Goki, Riley Clemens, and it's like some of these more pop-leaning CCM acts that John was the A&R for. Then Asher flies home, and he's like, oh, I want to keep writing and whatever. So then he texts me to set up. He's like, I'm doing some more legit sessions recently. That's what he was talking about. So anyway, super full circle moment.
Crazy, yeah.
So then I write a couple songs with Asher, and he's like, dude, this was so good. Like, oh, and the song's pretty cool. So we just kind of hang up. And I remember like after that, like a couple hours later, like typing up the text to him and like, hey, you mentioned like you'd been doing some more like legit sessions recently. Do you like, is there anybody you could introduce me to so I could maybe have some more legit sessions and stuff? I would love to do that. And I typed it up, and I remember like pressing backspace and like holding it where it like started like jumping backspace or whatever. Cause I was like, oh, I don't want to be that guy who's like asking for a contact and whatever. And then I was like, what can it hurt? I just like felt a nudge in me to like go ahead and send it. And then because of that text, like I would not be in Nashville had I not sent that text, because he wound up introducing me to John. And then it was so terrifying because at this point, like I'd never interacted with a record label other than that one thing that like I embarrassed myself at. I did not do a good job of like handling that interaction and whatever. I sent like 3 songs to John in this email. So Asher was like, hey, John said I could pass along his email or whatever, which means it's going to be like a cold connect. If the thing where basically instead of Asher being able to send an email where it's like me, Asher, and John all on an email thread, basically John was just like, oh, you can just pass on my email. That's okay. And so it was like, okay, you're not really guaranteed a reply and that kind of, because there's not a warm connection. Right. So it was like, okay, so I already know to kind of have my expectations low. I sent in like 3 songs. I looked up who all John was A&Ring for, like what he'd done. So I was like, okay, so he works in CCM, not in worship, which I'd been primarily writing worship, and then like this random worship EDM thing I'd been working on, but always kind of worship. Yes. So he works in CCM, so I needed to like write some CCM songs and send those. So then I like write 3 CCM songs and demo them out, like just acoustic demos, and send them. and then hear nothing for 8 weeks. So it's like a while. So I'm like, and like, you got to think too, like at this point, like all I've ever wanted to do was write songs. Like, and I didn't even think about the fact that it was a career until around this moment. So now like it's bubbling up in me like, oh my gosh, I could like make a living, like live my life just writing songs, like, which is my favorite thing to do on earth. So every day I'm like checking my email like 200 times. I'm just like, please respond. And he gets back to me like 2 months later and he's like, literally it's like 6 words. He's like, these are pretty cool, dude. Or something. Like, it's like so few words. I was like, hey, can I send you some more? Or maybe he asked like, you got any more? Or something like that. He's like, these are good. Got any more? Or something like that. And I was like, yeah. And I did not. So I wrote 3 more and demoed those and sent them. And then he was like, yeah, these are cool too. Like, do you want to come like hang out in my office sometime? And I was like, yes. Went to Nashville for the first time, like went with like my in-laws, like got an Airbnb. We all went up. He had to cancel the day before because like a family emergency happened.
Oh no.
So I like had this other like write set up with somebody in Nashville. And so I like did that. And so eventually I get on the books like a month later. I'm like lint rolling my jeans before I go in because I'm like, I have to be so impressive. I don't feel like I was very impressive. Like it was just like, because again, I'm so nervous. Like I want it so bad that I'm just like trying too hard in the whole thing. You should meet so-and-so and so-and-so. They're like on the come up here in town. And I was like, yes, please. That would be amazing. Who are they? And it was 2 producers because I told him I was a like songwriter. And he kind of told me what a top liner was, which for those of you who don't know, a top liner is the person who's more of the concept person, like lyric and melody. You can do chords and stuff too, but I'm not the guy. If you want like the perfect snare sound and you want me to like comb through Splice and like find the perfect snare sound for your thing, I'm not your guy. Like I'm like maybe 6 out of 10 at production, but I really believe in myself at like 10 or 11 out of 10, you know, as a top liner. Like that's my game. And then I thankfully get to work with people who like production is their like 11 out of 10 thing, you know. So he kind of explained to me what a top liner is, and I was like, okay, so what's like the best thing I can do if I want to be a top liner in the industry? And he was like, read all the books. Just like be thinking through the language and like consuming art and like thinking critically and like finding interesting concepts. So a lot of good advice in there too. And he like told me to like learn how to be a chameleon in the room because you're not making your art when you're in the room, you're making theirs. A lot of stuff that like kind of was foundational to like me learning how to become an instrument to elevate a room. There's a huge difference in the skill of writing and the skill of co-writing. You can know how to write a great song and be a horrible hang, and you'll never make it. You can know how to write a great song and die on every hill for your own idea when you can tell the artist isn't into it, and you'll never get a cut. You can write an amazing song that doesn't fit the artist's sound, and you'll never get a cut. Learning how to apply the right thing or the right idea to the right artist. Think about their brand. Think of what they've already said, what they should say next. Take in their input and don't shut them down. Let them like take some ownership of this stuff. Even if something was your idea and they feel like it was theirs, like that's a good thing because that means it feels like it was natural enough for it to be their idea. And don't try and be like, no, that was my idea. You know, just like little things where it's like, okay, I need to learn the skill of co-writing at this point. Because I'd done some co-writing, but not definitely at this caliber. So he introduced me to those 2 producers, and then I started making trips like every 2 weeks to work with some of these guys. And like every time I would come up, I would book sessions with those 2, and then I would email John and say, hey, I'm coming up this week. I've already booked a session with the 2 guys you introduced me to. Is there anybody else you can introduce me to write more with? Or like, hey, me and the guy that you've introduced me to, we have a session on this day. Is there an artist that you could plug in for us? And so kind of use that as like, hey, I'm utilizing the connections you've given me, and like I'm not just like letting that fall by the wayside. Like I'm utilizing that, and so if you give me more, I'll utilize those too. So it's like
stewarding it
well because like then they know they're not wasting their time by helping you because they're gonna give you like a unit of 1 and you're going to turn it into a unit of 10.
That's good.
You know, it's a very valuable skill to learn how to like do the network thing, but it not feel like networky, but just like stewarding that.
That's good.
That process. So started doing that, built a little network that way. And then eventually Sierra and I, my wife, were like, okay, I think God is calling us to Nashville. So, and again, no major doors had opened, but we're like, okay, God is calling us to Nashville. And so like in the next 6 months, we moved to Nashville. Which looking back is crazy, like so fast. Because we had planned to like move to Atlanta. I'd already applied at like Home Depot headquarters as a marketing whatever in Atlanta. Such a quick turn. But I remember at the time it felt like, man, it feels like so long. Like we're ready to go. And it just felt like the longest 6 months ever to wait to move.
Yeah.
We wind up in Nashville. I had like 2 publishing meetings in my like first week in town, which is like a big deal. Like it was like crazy. And especially for me, I didn't know until later that like that was really quick compared to like a lot of people. It's like coming to town and having that level of connection and whatever. So I came in again, so green, had no idea how any of it worked. And I was like, okay, so I guess I'm probably about to sign a deal and like try and do the songwriter thing. And so I just need like a job that'll like get us to town and like cover bills until I can sign a deal. I start working at Verizon. I'm like, okay, so I've just got to be here for like 2 or 3 months or whatever. Wound up being at Verizon for like 2 years because like it did not know it just doesn't work. That you don't move to town and then sign a deal in a few months. Right. Unless there's something else already really going on where like you've really proven yourself. Like all those relationships were too early. They definitely should not have signed me that soon. It would have been too green of a relationship. And even if I was like the most talented writer on the planet, it would be the relationship was too young. It would be like, you know, like getting married too quickly, you know, like that kind of thing where it's like, okay, you like maybe it'll work out great, but like also you don't really know yet.
Yeah,
so it's
like,
that's true. Because it's like years of an agreement for signing and all that stuff. So anyway, but I just didn't know any of that yet. The reason I did Verizon is because I was like, okay, my background is in marketing, so I can do sales. And I was good at it and like made enough money to get us by and whatever. We're in an apartment that we hated and it was just like, didn't even feel like safe. And it was just like, not the vibe. But we were in Nashville and we were so excited to be in Nashville. Like there's just like a vibe in the town. Everybody's chasing something, like their dreams. There's just a cool vibe. The reason I did like a sales job, one of the reasons is because then I could work weekends. So I would work Friday through, because the busiest time is the weekend for them. So I would work Friday through Tuesday so then I could have 2 weekdays off so I could write with people who are doing it full time, as opposed to just people who are available in the evenings and weekends, which are not the people who are doing it full time.
Right.
So that was super intentional. And then, so for the first like 8 or 9 months, maybe a year, I worked Friday through Tuesday at Verizon. And then, and I would get home at like 8:30 or 9, like, and it was the first time I'd worked a shift like that. I'd always worked at churches and stuff. So it was like the first time I'd done a job like that. And then it was public facing where, you know, the public doesn't always treat everybody with respect. So like that was difficult. And then on Wednesday, Thursday, I would have an 8:30 coffee meeting, 10 a.m. session, 2:30 session. And then I would come home at like 7 or 8 because I wanted to expand my network. I would do the same thing that I did with my friend John, who was in A&R at the time. I would, you know, have the session. Like, that was awesome. Let's book another one. Get another date with them. And then reach out to each person individually and be like, that was so good. I'm glad we got another one on the books. Is there another, if it's the producer, is there another artist that you work with that like we could do one with? And then text the artist, be like, that was so good. Is there another producer that you'd want us to work with, like with the 3 of us? You know, and so it's like, then I would meet that new person and then I would have access to whoever they knew and like just kind of trying to grow my circle organically and also not doing wrong by anybody, like not trying to cut anybody out of the loop.
Absolutely.
And so trying to both take care of the relationships that I had and also try and utilize and steward those relationships to build new, genuine connections, not trying to use people, but it's a difficult balance. I'm sure along the way that I probably made some missteps as I was trying to navigate it, but always trying to have that heart of like, okay, I'm not trying to use people to get to people that they know, but I am being intentional with relationships and trying to grow new relationships because that's part of the job that I'm trying to do. So through COVID and all of that stuff, and I'm like doing Zoom sessions and doing regular sessions and just like a lot of setbacks in that where like I got like really close with some publishers, like with one publisher kind of early on, like 7 or 8 months into town. I had several meetings in a row and like that starts to look good as far as like an offer. And they had liked several songs. And they put me with artists, tried me out, and it went well. People asked for me again. So like that kind of thing. And then I had a session where I was like, oh yeah, like I write Christian music and other stuff. Like that's going to be a part of my career is writing Christian and other things. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh yeah, we really don't do that. And kudos to them for not just trying to like falsely say that they do. Like they knew their vision. So no shade on them at all. They said what they should have said. But I was like, that's not really what I feel called to. Like I feel as called to mainstream music in some capacity as I do to Christian music.
Right.
They did not follow up with another meeting and they kind of stopped scheduling me in sessions. And then COVID hit. And then like every session that I had booked, I had like stacked the month of March, funny enough, March 2020. I'd stacked that month with 11 what I was calling signed sessions, where I was like, because I was independent, not signed at all. The sessions that are valuable for me right now are the sessions where I know that song is going to get put back in front of an industry professional that would have the ability to generate some excitement around me, some buzz, if you will. And maybe if they really like it, then they would offer a meeting, set me up with more sessions, and that would kind of get me to the next step of getting closer to being signed somewhere. And for those of you who don't know, being signed, it's like kind of like a new starting line. If it's the finish line for one race and the starting line for another. But it's kind of when you're like, okay, I'm now a professional songwriter. I can do this full time. That eventually would let me leave Verizon and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
So I'm like trying to set those things up, and then I had 11 signed sessions in March, and I was like, oh, this is like so good. I've like spent a lot of time in relational equity booking these sessions, and then COVID hits and they all cancel. And I was like, oh, and I just really didn't know what to do. And I feel like I'm like working really hard and writing really good songs and building a network of people, but like nothing is happening yet. It's taking a lot longer than I thought. Yeah. And so it was just a difficult season, and I'm like having deep anxiety because I'm not resting, because I'm like working 7 days a week and all this stuff. And my wife and I didn't get to see each other that much during that season because she was working at the zoo at the time in an internship that was also unpaid, which was crazy. But so it's like, that's a whole story. So she has to go in at like 5 or 6, and then I'm working like evening. So I go in at like 11, and then I don't get home till like 8:30. But then by the time I get home, she's going to bed because she has to get up at 5. Right, so it's like so it's like everything was just really, really hard. Yeah. So some stuff happened with my wife's job. She wound up working at a place that she works now called the Farmer's Dog that is amazing, and she's just like absolutely crushing it. Awesome. And so once she took that position, then she was making just enough where she could cover our bills with the house that we had just moved into. So we got out of the apartment and we moved into this townhome that we're still in now. So that helped with mental health a lot. Just being like, okay, we have a space that's like, it was a new build, and it was like, it's a little further out, but it's like, oh, it was within our budget. And it was like right before all the housing stuff went crazy. Yeah. We moved in there. She was able to hold down the bills. I was doing like Sound Better, like sessions where like people would hire me to write a song with them and whatever. And I would do some of that and like just kind of making money on side projects when I could, but I got to leave Verizon at that point. I'd gone part-time a few months before that, so I had more days a week to write, and then I got to leave once she took the job at the Farmer's Dog. So now I'm full-time writing, but through this time, like I'd met with Capital one time at a meeting that it was like right after I moved to town, and it did not go well. I felt like I was stumbling over my words. Again, so nervous. But I'd connected with Lindsay O'Halloran, who's a good friend of mine now, and at the time, she was the newest member of the publishing team there. And so she was like the top dog, you know, she was like the newest, most accessible person where I'm like, okay, if I send an email, she's the most likely to reply. You know, I left Verizon in November, and like right before Black Friday, because I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that again. So then in January, I think is when I started, like I reached out to Lindsay and I was like, hey, I know like Universal, so Capital is under Universal. So I was like, I know Universal still has like policies about meeting with people or whatever because of COVID. It was still going on. But could we do like a Zoom coffee and just like hang out and like, could I just like pick your brain on some stuff? She's like, I would love that. And then so we kind of develop a relationship through doing that. So we kind of built a friendship on that and just kind of talking through the industry and her kind of helping me strategize, because, you know, she wants me to win. She isn't necessarily going to like sign me tomorrow and like put her own stake in me yet, but she like, everybody wants everybody to win in this town. Eventually I was like, hey, can I send you songs every 6 weeks before we do this meeting, and just like you tell me what you like and don't like about them when we hang out? And she was like, yeah, I would love that. And so I like put together like the 5 or 6 like best songs. I would put who I wrote them with, what was going on for those people, like if they had signed somewhere, if they were about to sign somewhere, if so-and-so was looking at them. So I'm like also trying to put like industry intel in there, like trying to like say, hey, I know what's going on. Like I'm being strategic. I'm trying to make it easy to root for me. So I would send it, and then we would hang out, and she'd be like, oh yeah, I really like that one. That one's like really good. The chord progression's really interesting. Like she would give me some feedback. She's a songwriter as well, so she understands songs. Like she knows like the integrity of songs. Eventually, I remember I was like, so I know at this point, clearly because we haven't had this conversation, that there's a gap between where I am and where a writer would have to be for you to sign them. Can you just make me aware of that gap? And she was like, yeah. And she told me later, she doesn't want to damage relationships. She doesn't want to hurt feelings. Like she's such a people person. She's like a force to be reckoned with also. But so she's like still navigating. It was still early in her career too. So she's still navigating like, okay, how do I do this? She had not signed anyone before. So she was like, okay, yeah, there is a gap. And for us to sign a top liner, because they have a lot of producers at Capitol, there are fewer top liners, which means like if you kind of make it in as a top liner, it can be really, really good. But it's kind of easier to get in the door as a producer because there's a lot of legwork done by a producer because they're producing a whole thing. Whereas I go home after the session. So she's like, for us to sign a top liner, like you have to make yourself irreplaceable. Like you have to come in with ideas that are unique and interesting and emotional and to the point where other writer producers are saying like, oh, I'm with this artist. And if we want a song like that, we've got to have Gamble. So then I go in and I like really try and hone in on what makes a concept great. And so I'm like listening to songs that are working at radio. And as it is with any genre, there's going to be things that go number one that you think are brilliant and you have song envy and you're like, oh, I wish I wrote that. And there are going to be songs that go number one where you're like, oh my gosh, how do people like this awful song? You know? And that's all music. It's so subjective. Like there's no true great or whatever. I was like, okay, so let me find the overlap of the Venn diagram of like songs that I like. I'm like, oh man, I would be so proud of that if I wrote it. And it also worked. It also went number one and like the audience loved it. So I'd like find a collection of those songs. And then I was like, okay, so what do these concepts have in common? Songs that I would be proud of if I had written them and also worked. It's not generic lyrically. It like has a cleverness to it or it has a uniqueness to the concept, the angle on how they talk about something. So it doesn't feel like I've heard it before. There's a sincerity to the melody and the way that it's delivered that doesn't feel like casual a lot of times, I would say.
Yeah.
And these are just things that I prefer because, and I've talked about this ad nauseum with so many people, but for me, faith has always been this deep and personal thing. And for a lot of people, it can be this very joyous and casual kind of thing and also have the depth, but it can just be this source of like levity for a lot of people, I think, especially if they've grown up in the church. But for me, it's got me through really hard things. When I think about why follow Jesus, like why believe in God, it's like, well, because I don't think I'd be here without him. You know, it's not like, oh, because like there's so much joy and like, and again, those are great reasons. But like for me personally, the songs that resonate with me are the songs that touch on that. And people always say, write what you know. Yeah. So like I kind of learned that quickly. I was like, okay, so even though people resonate with these songs that kind of have this levity to them, like maybe that's not what I would resonate with. So maybe that's not what I would be proud of. I try to focus more on writing the songs that like I would have needed to hear when I was 15 or that I would have related to and I connect to now. And I'm still a part of some of the other ones too, because again, I'm not like steamrolling every session and I'm just trying to elevate. If the artist needs an up-tempo like show opener, then like, awesome, we're going to write an up-tempo show opener. And I'm going to try and inject as much sincerity as I can into that while still keeping it within the artist's vision. I kept sending Lindsay songs and kept asking for a meeting and doing all that stuff. And eventually I sent her a set of songs. We actually got to meet in person, you know, because it was after COVID. And
crazy, man.
She was like, this batch of songs was amazing. She was like, I would be ready to move forward with introducing you to the rest of the team at Capitol and like trying to sign you.
That's
and
awesome.
all that. And then it took 6 months from then because I had to meet all the A&Rs and
takes time.
It takes a long time.
It's
with
not
a machine like
thing.
Capitol. Yeah. Like it's like their process is so long. And again, it was her first signing of her career. Wow. I think she's going to be a legend of the industry. She's now the head of Tribal Publishing over at like Maverick City. So I'm just super honored that I was the first writer that she like stuck her neck out for, you know, and she like took a chance on. And we talk all the time about how like, you know, getting to watch the milestones and like there was a Billboard chart that came out the other day. It's like the top 10 songwriters, whatever, on Billboard. And I think I was at number 5 on there, which is just like cool. Like,
bro. Yes,
so just
sir.
like getting to like text her and I don't say that with any like pride or anything. Those charts really aren't that big of a deal, but just texting her, I mean like, hey, your belief in me has changed my life. You seeing something in me that God was doing that maybe God was pulling her toward like being a part of my story too. I'm so honored that I got to work with her for the time that I did. And we still get to work together, even though she's not my point person at Capitol anymore. So now I've been at Capitol for 2.5 years, which has flown by.
That's awesome.
Actually, so Counting My Blessings for me is actually about getting to leave Verizon.
Oh, that's
so
awesome. Yeah.
we wrote that song 2 months after I signed at Capitol. I have a voice memo in my phone of me singing the chorus top down in the shower. Like you can hear the shower running in the background. Like I'd had the title in my phone for a while, but I was just so overwhelmed with gratitude because we had gone through such a hard season. Like part of what got my wife to the farmer's dog was she got laid off from the zoo because of COVID after she had just worked really hard through like a non-paid internship, all this stuff, earning a keeper position, got this job, then got laid off because of COVID, works at another place, and then winds up taking a job at a dog training facility. And on her third half day, gets attacked by a police dog.
No.
And yeah, like I'm literally like driving to Verizon and she calls me. She's like, hey, I'm okay, but like I'm on my way to urgent care. Like she has like 2 huge scars. Like it like latched on her arm. Like
my gosh.
German Shepherd, rejected police dog because it had attacked its handler. And she had been told she wasn't going to have to work with this dog for like the first 6 months. And then they made her work with the dog, even though she said she wasn't comfortable, made her work with the dog on her 3rd day.
No.
So watching my wife, who of course I love so much, like watching her, she loves dogs, like loves animals, always has, like was going to be a veterinarian. And then it's like, oh, I'm more interested in the behavior side. So she goes into that, works at the zoo, all this stuff. And then watching her be afraid of dogs. The thing that she like loves most, you know, like she loves animals like I love music. So like watching her be afraid of that like makes me emotional now to think about. We had been through this like so much at that point, just moving to the town and like then COVID being the setback that it was, and me working at Verizon and like I was having like anxiety attacks because I couldn't rest and trying to figure out, like I'd worked at churches for 10 years. And so like my faith had this like jaded shell to it too. I'd been a professional Christian for so long. So I was like, how do I be just a Christian? How do I just like follow Jesus, learning that I don't have to have the answers, because when you're on staff at a church, you have to have the answers, or you feel like you do at least.
Right.
Learning that there are some things I'm like, okay, I can just hold that open-handedly, and one day I can ask God and he'll tell me I was wrong. I'll be like, cool. Amazing. Great. Life is not about having the correct theology. Walking through that and learning it, and learning like just because like this certain thing that the majority of people that are believers, or like people of where I'm from maybe believe, doesn't make it where I'm like, oh, if I don't believe that, I'm not a Christian now, or like I can't have a relationship with God because I disagree with him about the nature of God in this way. Just kind of navigating a lot of that for the first time was really hard for my faith, and at the same time trying to navigate commerciality and commercialism, I guess is the better word, and faith together. Some people are saying just say the like corny thing they want to hear, like that's what, and so it's like it brings this level of jadedness and shallowness into faith music, and then that bleeds into faith. And so it's like this really hard time. So then getting to sign this publishing deal, getting to like not have to worry about like working odds and ends jobs anymore. My wife was in a great job that she loved and was really good for her like emotional well-being. And we were in a house and not the apartment that we did not feel safe at. And like just like so many of these things where it's like, okay, like life is not perfect, but if I just like start trying to like add up the things that God has done for us, like, man, I can't count that, you know. That's kind of where the song came from. For me, I have so much to be thankful for. And so kind of like started it there, and then brought that chorus into the session, and there was a lot of energy around it. Seth, it was my like 2nd or 3rd time writing with Seth, who I'm good friends with, and he's an amazing writer. And he got really excited about the chorus. He was like, yes. And like, it sounded like him and like what he does. And and then he was like, oh, what if the pre-chorus, which is arguably the most like iconic part of the song. He said, what if the pre-chorus, we like actually like count? So we're like 1, 2, 3. And I was like, bro, that's so cool. And so then we like end up writing that part. It kind of all came together really quickly. And I'm just so thankful that song has done what it does. People have resonated with that in the way that they have. But yeah, for me, it literally it was about like we're finally on the other side of such a hard season. And that was almost 2.5 years ago. That song that means so much to me, like sat in a Google Drive for 2 years, and then finally came out this last June, and then slowly started to pick up the traction, and then went viral and all that stuff. But
that's incredible, man. Congrats to you.
Thank you, man.
And it's really cool to hear your story. I know I see your songs when you release them, you'll post about them, and it's really encouraging, but I don't always get to see more of the internal stuff and the struggles and the conflicts and the pain along the way. And I think it's really important for people to hear your story in its, rawness, how God shaped who you are as a 13 or 14-year-old boy, going upstairs and writing just whatever all the time. And then now you're living your dream.
I hope it's never lost on me. I try and really again, gratitude and gratefulness is so important to me. I hope I'm 28. I hope when I'm 40, I'm still just like, oh my gosh, I get to write songs for a job. I still feel like a kid in a candy store, I'm just amazing. Like, this is the best gig. And I remind myself of that too, because the financial side of it can be very delayed. Like, I don't even really know what it looks like yet, because it's like it's a royalty game. You don't get paid like up front. The financials can kind of be all over the place. But I would just remind myself, I'm like, the big perk of this job is that I get to do what I was put on this earth to do. I've never been more confident that I'm operating in the center of a calling, I just remind myself of that. I'm like, whatever financial situation is, like, I get to wake up tomorrow and write another song and just like try and chase something that I believe in and am proud of and will inspire and pull. Like, my mission statement for my faith-based music specifically is just to inspire people toward faith. And so that can look like inspiring someone who doesn't think about faith very often to consider it, or it could look like someone who is at church every time the doors are open to consider it again too, or to consider it more deeply or in a new way, or reflect on something they haven't reflected on in a while. But trying to write something that in all these ways inspires people toward faith. And again, that's something I'm so passionate about. So like, that's the perk of my job, not some like financial payout later, which I know God's going to take care of us. I get to do something that I'm so passionate about. And not everybody is fortunate enough to get to walk in every day and do something that they would do for free.
Absolutely.
You know?